The years passed and the baby, once so fragile, grew into a healthy, strong child. His first steps had been a milestone, a sign that life was pushing forward despite the hardships that had come before. Each day, as the sun rose and set, the child became more and more like the rest of the people in the village, but with something special about him. He had been a symbol of hope for Winona and Wee-Yaya, and he had brought light into their lives in ways they could never have imagined. But now he was growing into his own, becoming a little person full of wonder and curiosity. Winona had watched him with a deep, quiet pride. The child had brought so much healing to her heart. In caring for him, she had found a purpose she thought she had lost after the deaths of her own children. Every time she saw him running through the camp, laughing with the other children, she felt as though a weight had been lifted from her chest. She could smile again without the sadness that had once lingered in her eyes. She had become a mother once more, not through blood but through love and sacrifice, and that, to her, was even more precious than anything else. Wee-Yaya, too, had changed. The warrior who had once fought countless battles with fierce determination had now become a man who valued family and love above all else. His strength was no longer measured by the weapons he carried, but by the love and protection he offered to the ones who needed him most. When he looked at his child, he saw not just a baby who had survived against all odds, but a symbol of everything that was good and worth fighting for. He had fought battles on the plains, but this, the fight to keep his child alive, was the greatest battle he had ever faced. And it was a battle he had won. One evening, as the village sat around the fire, Wee-Yaya found himself reflecting on how far they had come. The child, now a few years old, was running around the camp with the other children, laughing and playing. His tiny feet kicked up the dust as he raced past Winona, who was sitting nearby, smiling as she watched. It was a beautiful sight, one that Wee-Yaya would never take for granted. His heart swelled with gratitude as he thought about everything that had happened, the hardships, the loss, and the unexpected turn that had led to this moment. He walked over to Winona, who was watching the child with the same quiet pride he had seen in her for so many years. He sat down beside her, his gaze following the child as he ran past them, his laughter ringing in the air. "She's grown so much," Wee-Yaya said softly, his voice filled with awe. "I never imagined this day would come. When I first brought him to you, I thought we might lose him. But now look at him. Look at what he's become." Winona smiled, her eyes never leaving the child. "He's more than I ever hoped for. And he has you to thank for that, Wee-Yaya. You brought him to me, and in doing so you saved him. I was able to give him life, but it was you who gave him hope." Wee-Yaya's heart warmed at her words, but he shook his head. "It was your kindness, Winona. It was your selflessness that made all of this possible. He paused, struggling to find the words. "I don't think I could ever repay you for what you've done. You've given us both something so precious." Winona turned to him then, her gaze soft and knowing. "It is not about repayment, Wee-Yaya. We are all connected and we help each other because we care. I didn't do this for a reward. I did it because it was the right thing to do." Her words resonated deeply with Wee-Yaya. Over the years, he had come to understand the truth in them. At first, he had thought of himself as the protector, the one who fought for survival. But now he saw the world differently. Protection wasn't just about strength and weapons. It was about caring for the people you loved, offering them comfort and safety when they needed it most. And it was about understanding that the greatest victories were not those won in battle, but those won in love. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the bond between Winona, Wee-Yaya, and the child only grew stronger. The village had come to see them not just as individuals, but as a family, united by love, sacrifice, and the strength that had been passed down through generations. Winona had given everything she had to save the child, and in doing so, she had created something even greater. She had created a family, a community of people who would always support each other no matter the challenges they faced. The child, now a little older, had become a part of the village. He played with the other children, learning the ways of his people and growing into a bright, curious little boy. Wee-Yaya and Winona both taught him the things they had learned from their elders, the stories of their ancestors, the traditions of their people, and the importance of respecting the land and the spirits that guided them. As the seasons passed, the family became a source of inspiration for others. The story of the warrior and the widow who had come together to save a child was shared from one generation to the next. It became a tale of hope, of resilience, and of the power of love to overcome even the greatest obstacles. People in the village began to see that, just as Winona had given everything she had to save the child, so too could they help one another no matter the odds. One day, as the child sat in Winona's lap, looking up at her with wide, innocent eyes, she realized just how much he had changed her. He had brought her back to life in a way that nothing else could. Her grief had not disappeared, but it had transformed. It had become a part of her, woven into the fabric of who she was. And now she was no longer just a widow, no longer just a woman defined by her losses. She was a mother, a caretaker, a protector. She was a part of something larger than herself, something that would continue long after she was gone. Yaya, too, had found a new purpose. He had fought many battles in his life, but none had been as important as this one. This child, the one who had been saved by Winona's love, had become the reason he fought. He no longer fought for honor or glory. He fought to protect this family, this community, and the future that was still being built piece by piece. The warrior in him had not disappeared, but it had been tempered by the love he now carried in his heart. And so, the years went on, and the child grew. He learned the ways of the land, the wisdom of the elders, and the strength of his people. He became a part of the story that had been passed down through generations, a living reminder of the power of love, sacrifice, and community. The village watched as he flourished, and they, too, were reminded of the power of kindness, of the ways in which small acts of care could change the world. Winona, Wye, and the child, this small family, had found something precious. In a world full of hardship, they had discovered the strength that comes from caring for one another, from choosing love over fear, and from embracing the bonds that connect all people. The child, now grown, would one day tell his own story, passing down the lessons he had learned from the people who had saved him. And so the cycle of love and hope would continue, growing stronger with each generation, just as it had begun so many years ago. As the seasons continued to change, so did the lives of Winona, Wye, and the child who had brought them together. The baby, once weak and fragile, had now blossomed into a lively and curious little one. His giggles filled the air like the sound of music, and his eyes, once dull from illness, now sparkled with the joy of life. He had become not just a child, but a symbol of hope for everyone in the village. His survival was proof that even in the harshest of times, life could still thrive. Winona, too, had changed. The woman who had once carried the heavy weight of grief in her heart had found a new sense of purpose. Caring for the child had given her a reason to smile again, a reason to wake up each morning with hope in her heart. She no longer felt the deep emptiness that had once consumed her. The love she had poured into the child had begun to fill the spaces in her heart that had been broken by loss. And as she watched the baby grow stronger with each passing day, she felt a deep sense of pride. It was as if, through this child, she had found a way to heal her own wounds. For Wye, the transformation was just as profound. He had always been a strong and proud warrior, accustomed to fighting battles and facing danger head-on. But this battle, the one to save his child, had humbled him. He had come to Winona in desperation, and she had answered his plea without hesitation. Her sacrifice, her willingness to give of herself so freely, had touched him deeply. He had watched as the baby grew stronger, and with each day he was reminded of the power of kindness, love, and community. The bond between Winona and Wye had also grown stronger. What had started as a simple act of kindness, the feeding of a dying child, had blossomed into a deep, unspoken connection. They spent more time together now, not just as a man and woman with a shared responsibility, but as friends who had come to understand each other in ways that no one else could. Their conversations, once brief and formal, had become longer, more meaningful. They spoke of their pasts, their dreams, and the challenges they had faced. In many ways, they had become each other's support system, finding strength in one another as they navigated the ups and downs of life. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, Wye sat outside with Winona and the child, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. The warmth of the fire crackled in the background, and the sounds of the village slowly faded into the distance. The child, now old enough to sit up on his own, played with a small wooden toy that Winona had carved for him. He giggled as he tried to balance the toy in his tiny hands, his face lit up with the pure joy of discovery. Wee Yaya looked over at Winona, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. "You have given him so much," he said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. "You have given him life, hope, and a future. I will never be able to thank you enough for what you've done." Winona smiled softly, her eyes glancing down at the child in her arms. "It is not just me, Wee Yaya," she replied gently. "It is all of us. This child, this little one, he has brought us together. He has reminded us that we are not alone, that we are all connected, and in that we have all been given something precious." Her words resonated deeply with Wee Yaya. He had always believed in the importance of community, of looking out for one another, but he had never fully understood the depth of that connection until now. The child, who had once been on the brink of death, had brought them all closer together. His survival had united them in a way that nothing else could have. As the days grew longer and the seasons began to shift toward spring, the child continued to thrive. His tiny hands now reached out for everything in sight, and his legs, once too weak to support him, were now strong enough to carry him as he crawled around, exploring the world with a curiosity that seemed boundless. He laughed as he discovered new things, and each new discovery seemed to fill the hearts of everyone around him with joy. For Winona, the joy of watching the child grow was not just about seeing him become healthier. It was about the emotional healing she had experienced through caring for him. When she looked at the baby, she no longer saw the pain of her past. She saw the promise of the future, the possibility of new beginnings. This child, who had once been so close to death, had become the center of her world. He had filled the emptiness in her heart with love, and for that, she would be forever grateful. Wee Yaya, too, had been changed by this experience. He had come to see life in a different light. The battles he had fought, the victories he had won, no longer seemed as important as the simple acts of kindness that had saved his son's life. He had witnessed firsthand the power of love and sacrifice. He had seen how a single act of selflessness could change the course of someone's life, and in doing so, he had gained a new perspective on what truly mattered. The baby, now almost a year old, had become the heart of their small family. He had brought so much light into their lives, and in return they had given him all the love and care they could offer. Winona and Wee Yaya had become partners in every sense of the word. They shared the responsibilities of raising the child, of teaching him the ways of their people, and of ensuring that he grew up strong and healthy. They had found something precious in one another, something that went beyond friendship, beyond duty. It was a bond formed through shared love and sacrifice. The tribe had also begun to notice the change in the two of them. What had started as a simple act of charity had turned into something much deeper. The village elders spoke of how Winona's kindness had saved the child's life, and how her strength had inspired others to look out for one another. Wee Yaya, once a man defined only by his role as a warrior, had become something more, a protector of life, a man who valued compassion as much as courage. The tribe looked up to them both, not just for their bravery, but for the way they had come together to create something beautiful from the ashes of their pain. One day, as the child took his first steps, the entire village gathered around to watch. Wee Yaya stood proudly beside Winona, their hands intertwined as the baby wobbled forward, his tiny feet taking uncertain steps but full of determination. The crowd cheered, and Winona's heart swelled with love. She had given so much to this child, and now she was witnessing the reward of that love. The child had grown not just in size but in strength and character, and she knew in her heart that he would continue to grow into a person who would bring honor and joy to their people. Wee Yaya leaned down, picking the child up in his arms, and looked at Winona. "This is our family now," he said quietly. "Together we've created something beautiful, and we will protect it always." Winona smiled, her heart full. She had never imagined that her life would turn out this way, that she would find such peace and purpose after all the pain. But now, as she looked at the child in Wee Yaya's arms, she realized that life had a way of surprising you. It had a way of healing even the deepest wounds if you were willing to open your heart to the possibilities. And so, the three of them, Winona, Wee Yaya, and the child, stood together, a family bound not by blood, but by the love and sacrifices that had brought them together. They had overcome loss, pain, and grief, and in doing so, they had created something far more powerful than they had ever imagined. A future full of hope, love, and the promise of brighter days ahead. As the days passed, the baby continued to grow stronger. Each day he seemed more alert, more aware of the world around him. His small hands, once so weak, now grasped at the fabric of Winona's cloak as she held him. His eyes, which had been dull and lifeless, now sparkled with curiosity. It was as if he had been reborn, not just physically, but in spirit as well. Winona's constant care, her selfless attention, had given him the strength to survive, and in return the child seemed to breathe life back into her as well. Winona had always been a quiet, strong woman. She had experienced grief before, and it had left scars on her heart that no one could see. She had lost her husband, the man she had loved deeply. She had lost her children one by one, to illness and misfortune. It had been the hardest thing she had ever endured, and the weight of that loss had been heavy, almost unbearable at times. But with each passing day as she held this child in her arms, it was as if the cracks in her heart were slowly beginning to mend. There was something about caring for this little one, something about giving him the nourishment he needed, that made her feel whole again. For Weiyaya, watching the transformation in his child was nothing short of miraculous. The baby that had once been close to death, the one he had feared would never see another sunrise, was now thriving. He no longer cried from hunger or pain. He laughed sometimes, his tiny, joyful giggles filling the room with an innocence that was impossible to ignore. Weiyaya's heart swelled with pride and relief. He knew that without Winona's intervention, without her kindness and sacrifice, this little life might have slipped away. The warrior, usually so strong and composed, often found himself overcome with emotion as he looked at the child, who now seemed like a symbol of hope. But Winona's role in the baby's life went beyond simply providing milk. She had become a second mother to him. She fed him, held him, soothed him when he cried, and comforted him when he needed it most. She was there for him in ways that no one else could be. She had given him not just life, but the warmth and love that every child needs to grow. In the quiet moments when the fire flickered and the world outside was still, Winona would sing softly to the baby, the old songs of her people, songs that spoke of love, of life, and of the strength of the earth. It was in these moments that she felt a deep connection to the child, a bond that was as strong as the one she had once shared with her own children. The days turned into weeks, and as the baby grew stronger, Weiyaya began to realize something else. Winona's care, her dedication to the child, was healing not just the baby, but her as well. She had suffered so much loss, and yet she had opened her heart to this child, welcoming him into her life without hesitation. She had given him more than just milk. She had given him her love, her strength, and her spirit. And in doing so, she had begun to heal her own broken heart. The warrior could see it in the way she moved now, in the way she spoke to the child. There was a softness to her that hadn't been there before, a warmth that made her seem more at peace with herself. Winona's grief had not vanished completely, but it was no longer the dominant force in her life. Caring for this child had given her a sense of purpose that she hadn't felt in a long time. It reminded her that life, no matter how fragile, always had the potential to grow, to flourish, and to bring joy. And with that joy came a sense of healing, not just for the child, but for herself as well. In the evenings, when the firelight danced on the walls of their small dwelling, Weiyaya would sit beside Winona as she cared for the child. They would talk quietly, sharing stories of their lives, of their people, and of the challenges they had faced. Weiyaya was a man of few words, but there was something about Winona's calm presence that made him feel comfortable opening up. He shared with her his memories of battles fought and victories won, and she shared stories of her childhood, of her family, and of the love she had once known. It was in these quiet moments, away from the rest of the tribe, that the two of them began to form a bond of their own. It was not just a bond formed through the baby, but through their shared experiences of loss and survival. They both understood the pain of losing loved ones, and they both knew the importance of holding on to what remained. Winona had lost her husband, her children, but she had not lost herself. She had found a way to keep going, to find joy in the small things. And Weiyaya, though still carrying the weight of his own past, found solace in knowing that he wasn't alone. The bond between them grew stronger as the baby continued to thrive. The little one, once fragile and sickly, was now active and full of energy. He laughed as he played with the small wooden toys that Winona had carved for him. He reached out with his tiny hands, trying to grab at the world around him, as if he was eager to experience everything it had to offer. And Winona, ever patient, watched over him with a tenderness that spoke volumes. The baby had become a bridge between two people who had once been strangers, but who now shared something far deeper than just a connection. They shared the care and love of a child, and in doing so, they shared a piece of their hearts. It was not just the baby who was healing. It was them too. Each day they were growing closer, and with each passing moment they realized that their lives would never be the same. For Yaya, this realization was both comforting and humbling. He had come to Winona with a broken heart, desperate to save his son. But he had found something more. He had found a friend, a companion, and a woman who understood him in a way no one else could. She had given him something that he could never repay: her love, her care, and her unspoken promise to always be there. Winona, too, had found something unexpected. She had found a sense of belonging, a place where her heart could heal and her spirit could rise again. She had given her milk, her love, and her time to this child, but in return she had received something just as precious: the chance to start anew. And so, as the baby grew, so did their bond. The small acts of kindness and care that had begun in desperation blossomed into something much deeper. They were no longer just two people helping each other. They were a family, bound together not by blood but by love, sacrifice, and the shared experience of life's hardships. The baby, once so fragile, was now a symbol of hope for everyone around him. His survival, thanks to Winona's care, was a reminder that no matter how hard the world might seem, there was always a way forward. And for Winona and Yaya, the baby had given them something far more valuable than survival. He had given them each other, and the promise of a new beginning. As Winona carefully fed the baby, the small, fragile life in her arms began to show signs of improvement. The child, once so weak and silent, now seemed to find strength in the warmth of her care. His tiny hands moved slightly, his eyelids fluttered, and there was a soft sigh from his lips as he drank. For Yaya, this was the first sign of hope he had seen in days. He watched the scene unfold with a mixture of awe and deep gratitude, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. His heart, which had been weighed down by worry and despair, now felt a glimmer of hope. He stood silently, not wanting to disturb the moment, as Winona continued to care for the child. The fire crackled softly in the corner of the room, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The snow outside howled in the night wind, but inside there was a quiet peace that seemed to wrap around them like a warm blanket. For a brief moment the world outside disappeared. All that mattered was the child, the warmth of Winona's embrace, and the promise of life that was beginning to bloom again. Yaya knew that Winona's act of kindness would not be without its challenges. She had already lost so much: her husband, her children, and now she was offering her milk to another woman's child. It was a gift beyond measure, one that would require her to sacrifice what little she had left, yet she had not hesitated. There had been no doubt in her eyes when she made the decision to help. Her love for others, her ability to give even in the face of her own grief, was something that Yaya could only admire. As Winona fed the child, she felt an unexpected sense of calm settle over her. She had not expected this feeling. For so long, her heart had been heavy with sorrow, the pain of losing her own family weighing her down every day. But now, as she held this child, who was not her own but felt as though he were, she felt a strange sense of purpose. She knew that she was doing something important. She was giving life not just to the baby in her arms, but to herself as well. It was as though through this small act of kindness, she was healing a part of herself that had been broken for so long. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the child in her arms. She looked down at the baby's face, so peaceful now as he drank. His little features were still so fragile, but he was alive, and that was enough. The baby's breathing had become steady, no longer labored. There was a slight flush of color returning to his cheeks, and his eyes, once dull, were now bright with the flicker of life. Winona couldn't help but smile softly. This was what life was about. This moment of connection, of giving, of nurturing. Yaya finally spoke, his voice quiet but filled with deep emotion. "Thank you, Winona. I don't know how I could ever repay you for this. You've saved my son's life." Winona looked up at him, her expression calm but warm. "You do not need to repay me," she said softly. "This is not something that can be repaid. We all do what we must for each other. I have lost much, but I still have something to give. And I choose to give it now to you and to your son." Her words resonated deeply with Yaya. He had always been a warrior, strong and self-reliant, but in this moment he understood the true strength of what Winona was offering. It wasn't just milk she was giving. It was her heart, her spirit, her willingness to share in another's sorrow and hope. It was a gift that no one could take for granted. As the baby continued to feed, Winona shifted slightly, adjusting herself to make sure he was comfortable. She had become so accustomed to caring for others, to being the strong one, that this act felt almost natural. Yet in a way, it was also a way for her to heal herself. It was as though, through this child, she was reconnecting with the parts of herself that she had lost when she lost her own children. It was a bittersweet feeling, but it was also one that brought her peace. Weiyaya watched Winona as she worked, his gratitude growing even deeper. He knew how difficult this was for her. She had already suffered so much. Yet here she was, offering what little she had left to save his son. It made him realize just how connected they all were, how each person's actions, each moment of kindness, could have ripple effects that reached far beyond what one could see. After some time, Winona gently removed the baby from her breast, carefully cradling him in her arms. The child was still weak, but there was a spark of life in him now that had not been there before. His little hands were curling around the fabric of her cloak, and his eyes were wide, taking in the world around him. He looked up at her, and for the first time in days he seemed curious, aware, and alert. Weiyaya stepped forward, his voice filled with wonder.
"He is alive."
"He is strong again. I cannot believe it." Winona nodded, her eyes soft with affection. "He has the strength of life within him. But it will take time. He needs more care, more warmth, and more love. It is not enough for him to simply survive. He needs to thrive." Weiyaya looked at the baby, then back at Winona. "And he will. With your help, he will." The bond between Winona and the child grew stronger with each passing hour. As the days went by, the baby began to show more signs of life. He was feeding more regularly now, and his cries, though still faint, had more strength behind them. Winona continued to care for him with the same devotion she had shown on the first night, never tiring, never hesitating. For Weiyaya, this small act of kindness was changing everything. His entire outlook on the world was shifting. He had come to Winona in desperation, seeking help for his dying son. But now, as he watched his child slowly recover, he realized that it was not just the milk that had saved him. It was the love, the care, and the kindness that Winona had offered so freely. It was the strength of community, the unspoken bond that tied them all together. The baby, now strong enough to cry out for attention, seemed to bring a sense of purpose to everyone around him. His survival, his resilience became a symbol of hope for the entire tribe. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, life could still persist. That even in the face of death and loss, there was always the possibility of renewal. Winona's role in the baby's life was not just that of a caretaker. She had become a second mother to him, a source of love and comfort. She was filling the void that had been left in her heart when she lost her own children, and in return, the baby was giving her something that no one else could. A chance to heal, a chance to find peace in the most unexpected of places. As the days turned into weeks, the baby grew stronger. His cries became more robust, and his laughter, though rare, brought joy to those who heard it. Winona continued to care for him, and Weiyaya, ever grateful, did everything he could to support her. They were a family now, bound not by blood but by a deep, unspoken understanding and love. And through it all, Winona never once asked for anything in return. Her joy came from knowing that she had done the right thing, that she had given the greatest gift she could. And Weiyaya in turn became her protector, her supporter, and her friend, grateful beyond measure for the life that Winona had saved. In the vast cold expanse of the Dakota Territory, where the wind howls through the tall grass and the winter seems never-ending, a Lakota warrior named Weiyaya faced one of the greatest challenges of his life. His heart was heavy with sorrow, and his eyes, though strong and fierce from many battles, were clouded with worry. The snow had fallen thick, covering the land in a blanket of white, making it difficult to hunt or find enough food. The tribe, already struggling in the harsh season, had become desperate. The scarcity of resources made every day harder to survive. Weiyaya had a young child, a beautiful baby boy no more than a few months old. The infant's skin had once been soft and warm, and his little hands grasped at everything around him with the curiosity that all children have. But now the baby was sick. He had grown weak from hunger, and his cries were no longer strong and full of life. Instead, they were quiet, strained, and filled with pain. Wee Yaya had seen this before. He had lost children before to sickness and cold, but this was different. This was his son, and the thought of losing him broke his heart into 1,000 pieces. Wee Yaya's wife, too, was filled with despair. She sat beside the small fire, looking down at the baby, holding him in her arms, her face pale with grief. She had already lost so much. She had lost family members to the violence of raids, and now she was losing her baby, her last hope for a future filled with joy. She knew her husband tried his best. He had gone out into the wilderness to hunt. He had searched every corner of their land for food. But the bitter cold had made hunting nearly impossible. Nothing seemed to ease the pain of seeing her child suffer. For days, Wee Yaya had watched his son's condition worsen. The child's eyes had become dull and his small body had grown thin. He had no strength to cry, and his tiny body shook from weakness. His mother's milk, once a source of comfort, was no longer enough to keep him alive. There was just not enough food in the camp, and every effort to find more had been in vain. Wee Yaya, a strong and proud man, knew there was only one thing left to do. He had to find help. But where could he turn in such a harsh, unforgiving world? His tribe had suffered greatly, and their resources were stretched thin. Yet in the heart of the village lived a woman, one whom Wee Yaya had known for many years, whose heart was as big as the land itself. Her name was Winona. She was a widow, having lost her husband in a recent raid. Her grief was well known to everyone, as she had been through more than anyone should have to endure. Yet despite her own sorrow, she had continued to care for the community. Winona had a strength that many admired, a quiet strength that seemed to come from her deep love for her people. Winona had also lost children in the past, and the memory of their loss still haunted her. It was the pain of a mother's heart, a pain no one could ever truly understand unless they had lived through it. But through her loss, she had learned to give in ways that few others could. She understood grief, but she also understood how important it was to keep going, to keep fighting for life no matter how difficult it was. One cold evening, as the winds howled outside, Wee Yaya made his way to Winona's small dwelling. The night was dark and the stars above twinkled like distant cold fires in the sky. He moved quickly through the snow, the weight of his worry and grief pressing heavily on his chest. He had made his decision. He had to ask Winona for help, even though he knew it was an extraordinary request. As he approached her dwelling, Winona was sitting by the fire, the flickering light casting soft shadows on her face. She looked up as Wee Yaya entered, her eyes tired but welcoming. She knew that something was troubling him. She had always been able to sense when others were in pain. "Wee Yaya," she said softly. "What brings you here tonight?" Wee Yaya hesitated for a moment. He had never been one to ask for help easily. He was a warrior, proud and strong, but the sight of his child struggling to stay alive had stripped away all his pride. His voice was barely a whisper, full of sorrow and desperation. "Winona," he said, "it is my child. He is dying. My wife and I, we have nothing left to give him. He is so weak and I cannot bear to watch him suffer any longer. I have tried everything, but it is not enough. Please help us. He needs milk, something to save him." Winona's eyes softened and she felt a deep ache in her heart. She had heard of the baby's illness, but to see Wee Yaya so broken was something she had not expected. She had lost so much in her own life, but she had learned to live through the pain. But this, the plea of a father for his child, was different. Winona sat silently for a moment, her mind racing. She knew that her own body had little milk left. She had given much of it to her own children who had since passed, but there was still some left. But she also knew that this would be a difficult decision. To offer her milk to this child would be a sacrifice. It would mean that she would have nothing left for herself, and it would also mean that she would have to take on the responsibility of caring for this child, at least until he was strong enough to survive on his own. But Winona also knew what it meant to be a mother, to care for a child, to protect them no matter the cost. Her heart filled with compassion, and she looked at Wee Yaya with deep understanding. "I will help," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the weight of the decision. "I will feed him from my own breast. He will live." Wee Yaya could hardly believe his ears. He had hoped for a miracle, but he had not expected such an act of selflessness. He looked at Winona with a mixture of gratitude and awe. He knew the sacrifice she was making, and he could never repay her for this kindness. But at that moment it didn't matter. His child had a chance to survive, and that was all that mattered. Winona took the baby gently in her arms, cradling him as she would her own. She felt a strange sense of peace settle over her as she looked down at the fragile child. She whispered a soft prayer for him, hoping that the spirits of the land would guide her actions and bring strength to the baby. As Winona fed the child, Wiyaya stood by, watching with a mixture of emotions. Hope, relief, and deep gratitude flooded his heart. He had come to Winona as a last resort, and she had answered his plea without hesitation. The warrior understood the gravity of what was happening. He had asked for help, and in return Winona had given him not just milk, but something much more precious, her love and her strength. It was a small act, feeding a baby, but in that moment it felt like the most important thing in the world. For Winona, it was an act of compassion born from her own grief. For Wiyaya, it was the beginning of a bond that would tie their lives together in ways he could never have imagined.